Hey, listener. How's it going? Chris here. I just wanted to drop in here at the beginning with a couple of pieces of news. First of all, Jesse and I get into some real structural shenanigans on this one, which involves a Canva whiteboard, which I realize is a visual medium, whereas this one is an audio medium. So we're going to post that video on our YouTube channel. So you can head over there and have a look. And I think it still holds up pretty well during our discussion. There's a lot of hilarity and where does this sticky note go and whatnot. But if you're feeling a little left out, then yeah, you can go and watch the YouTube version in just a day or two. Secondly, don't forget that coming up on May 19th, we are going to be hosting a live watch party at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, of Anthony Minghella classic 1999 film, The Talented Mr. Ripley. We are going to be hosting that on our Discord server. There's a link in the show notes. You can also find it on our website and our social media. And we are going to be co-hosting that with Jeff Wilkinson of our friend podcast, Big Campaign Stories. It is going to be a wonderful evening. We're going to meet up. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to send everybody away to watch the movie. We're going to come back. We're going to do a live taping, and we are going to take your questions. So save the date, show up on May 19th, and join our Discord server by following that link in the show notes. Okay, now let's enjoy this awesome episode of Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet.
Oh, well, I mean, see, this is the thing is that, like, I think we're going to get two climaxes. Which some people would enjoy. You might not be used to that, but
You know, it's not often that we find the cold open while taping. This is like the beginning of the contemporary period.
Yeah.
Like all the stuff that we're reading right now, which is awesome.
Well, let's get into it. What are we talking about?
Well, we are talking about Arthur Conan Doyle's very first Sherlock Holmes piece of intellectual property. It's not really a novel. Like, and you said that you went and that this had been published. Was it published in its entirety in a periodical, or was it published serially in a
serially? I think that's a clue to some of the structural elements of it.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah.
So it was. I forget the name of the magazine. I'm sure we could look it up, but it was published, and I believe it was published around Christmas time. Because apparently, like, every year that magazine would publish like a featured serial that was kind of a big deal. And even though Doyle, I think, was unknown at that point, they must have really had a lot of confidence that these were great stories, and and rightly so, right?
Yeah,
like the editors knew they were onto something.
Yeah, there's no pension grill parser mistake in this one. You know, This is there's no editor that has a copy of John Irving's short story pinned to his wall in shame and ignominy for the rest of his life.
There might be. It might have been the second magazine that he wrote, but Study in Scarlet, the first Sherlock Holmes novel, was originally published in Beaton's Christmas Annual in 1887. Maybe it wasn't a serial. Maybe it was published.
Gosh, do you think they did the whole thing in one magazine? That would be amazing.
So. Yeah. But to your point, or to your point, the story was rejected several times before being published.
Awesome.
So,
yeah.
Rejected writers, rejoice.
Yes, there is, it's out there. It's possible. So we meet Dr. John H. Watson, medical doctor, late of the Army Medical Department. That is where we start. We start in his narration because we're actually reading these in, again, not too far off from Dracula. We're in epistolary / this is a collection of, this is Watson's diary is what we were reading.
I believe even the first thing you read is sort of like from the private papers of Dr. John H. Watson, MD, late of the Army Medical Department. Had been stationed in Afghanistan. Yeah. So Watson explains that he has just been gravely injured in Afghanistan. We never get a sense of how old he is, although I think 30s. He is slowly recovering in London. He gets a modest pension from the government. It's not really enough for him to rent his own room, or at least not a good one. So he needs a roommate. in order to afford rent. And from a mutual friend, he hears about a young chemist named Sherlock Holmes. So they go to the chemistry department at the university or the hospital, and they meet Holmes, who is perfecting a formula for detecting whether stains are blood stains. And he is affable and friendly, but also eccentric. And they kind of go through this checklist of vices to see if they can get along. And once, they determine that none of their vices annoys the other terribly, they decide to move in together. And there's, I guess, this sort of like Victorian reluctance for Watson to actually ask Holmes what he gets up to. So Holmes's profession is something of a mystery. And there's this funny moment where Watson lists all of his talents and all of his deficiencies and then finds it completely puzzling. But soon Watson learns that Holmes is in fact a consulting detective, perhaps the only one in the world, and that he helps other detectives and private parties solve crimes and mysteries.
Yes. And not long after we learn that, Detective Gregson of Scotland Yard asks Holmes to come to the scene of a murder. A man is dead, no signs of trauma, and the mysterious word RACH written on the wall. Holmes quickly investigates the scene and throws some veiled insults in the direction of another detective, Detective Lestrade, who is Gregson's rival. Does a fair amount of figuring out on the spot. There's this great moment when one of the detectives says, we need to be looking for a woman named Rachel because RACH. And then as Holmes is departing, he points out that means revenge in German. Holmes kind of, it's a sick burn. It's a chapter ending burn, actually.
Yeah, it's a kicker. It's a burn kicker. It's a kicker burn.
It's great. It's a really fun moment. Holmes begins the process of kind of solving the case, but Watson, because he's sort of worn out a lot of the time, isn't able to go along with him and observe his new roommate in action. Lestrade and Gregson pursue some avenues. Those prove futile. And then finally, Holmes summons this cab driver to 21B Baker Street, discovering that the man is Jefferson Hope, the murderer. I'll kick it back to you.
Right. And so we don't know who Jefferson Hope is. And suddenly we get into part 2. And this is basically Jefferson Hope's story, but it's no longer told by Watson, although perhaps Watson has written this up based on his interview with Jefferson Hope. And we get this Western novel that reads like a Zane Grey novel or something like that, where we meet John Ferrier, who is a middle-aged man, and his adopted daughter, Lucy. They are the only survivors of a group of homesteaders who are trying to cross the Great Salt Desert, which Doyle describes as incredibly bleak and inhospitable. And they are about to die, but they're rescued by a party of Mormons. And they meet Brigham Young himself. These are the Mormons on their way from Nauvoo, Illinois, to Salt Lake City. And they say, we'll rescue you, but you have to be Mormons. And Jefferson Hope agrees and becomes well-liked among the Mormons and owns a bunch of land. And Lucy grows into a beautiful young woman and falls in love with Jefferson Hope, who is a young... I want to say like hunter or guide.
He's a ranger.
Not a Mormon.
He's
a ranger. Yeah, he's Aragorn.
Even though this predates Aragorn by like 60 years.
This is OG Cinematic Universe, OG Aragorn. Yeah. But he is not a Mormon, and this is a problem because the Mormons insist that Lucy marry a Mormon.
Mm-hmm. And so Ferrier and Lucy attempt to flee. Hope shows back up after Ferrier's given kind of 30 days. And I believe on the evening of day number 1, Jefferson Hope returns. They flee into the desert. It looks like they're going to make it. They do not. Ferrier is killed on the spot. Lucy is abducted back to Salt Lake, where she is married to one of the Mormons.
We should say this happens when Jefferson Hope is out hunting, so he doesn't there's the party that recaptures them. He misses, and then he has to sort of track them back to Salt Lake City.
Lucy dies basically of a broken heart, and also just the horror of what she has probably gone through. And Hope vows vengeance, which kind of sets the stage for the London murders. We return to the current moment after a brief battle where we do learn that Jefferson Hope is a really tidy individual, that he kind of gives himself up and he's like, all right, you got me. And he very quickly cops to the fact that he has an aortic aneurysm that is going to pop any day, which he soon does. I think he's in jail for one night. The aneurysm explodes. And there's this great little moment where we get a newspaper story that says the public has been, they're not able to, deprived of a sensational treat of this whole fantastic story. Holmes tells us how he did it, to Gregson and Lestrade's dismay, curiosity, and resentment. And we're out.
And, well, yeah, dismay, curiosity, and resentment. But then in the public account, all the credit is given to Gregson and Lestrade, although Gregson and Lestrade graciously acknowledged that they had some assistance from Holmes, and the newspaper writer says something like, who apparently is showing some talent, and with the mentorship of such excellent detectives as Gregson and Lestrade might prove to be a great detective of his own one day. So there's a little bit of irony, there's a little bit of humor. I would like to start with a reading, if I may, and a question.
Yes.
Okay, so this is in the first part of the book, and this is when Holmes and Watson are at home. They've been roommates for a few weeks, and they get this telegram from Tobias Gregson basically saying there's been a murder over in Brixton. Come right away. This is, by the way, right after Holmes has guessed the profession of the delivery man, much to Watson's consternation. Watson is just starting to figure out how remarkable Sherlock Holmes' powers of deductions are. So Holmes says, Gregson is the smartest of the Scotland Yarders, my friend remarked. He and Lestrade are the pick of a bad lot. They are both quick and energetic, but conventional. Shockingly so. They have their knives into one another, too. They are as jealous as a pair of professional beauties. There will be some fun over this case if they're both put upon the scent. I was amazed at the calm way in which he rippled on. Surely there is not a moment to be lost, I cried. Shall I go and order you a cab? I'm not sure whether I shall go. I'm the most incurably lazy devil that ever stood in shoe leather. That is, when the fit is on me, I can be spry enough at times. Why, it is just such a chance as you've been longing for. Ah, my dear fellow, what does it matter to me? Supposing I unravel the whole matter, you may be sure that Gregson, Lestrade, and co. will pocket all the credit. That comes of being an unofficial personage. But he begs you to help him. Yes, and he knows that I'm his superior and acknowledges it to me, but he would cut his tongue out before he would own it to any third person. However, we may as well go have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them, if nothing else. Come on. He hustled on his overcoat and bustled about in a way that showed that an energetic fit had superseded the apathetic one. Get your hat, he said. You wish me to come? Yes, if you have nothing better to do. A minute later, we were both in a hansom, driving furiously for the Brixton Road. So, my question, and I have a few places I want to take it, but what are some adjectives? I don't like adjectives, but what are some adjectives that passage would lead you to use to describe Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
Manipulative.
Okay. What else?
Clever.
Yeah.
Manic depressive.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, we know that he suffers from depression. He says that he has long fits of torpor that can last for days, and you should just ignore me. It's not about you. He's very good
we
about...
also see him going from apathy to kind of like mania in the span of about 10 seconds in that passage, too. Any others you want to put on the list?
Brisk. Let's see. Other adjectives about Holmes. There's a lot of times in these early chapters, and this kind of leads into my next bit, that Watson describes him as conceited or arrogant. Yeah. And this passage, we are beginning to see that it's earned.
Yeah, I would say conceited, arrogant, vain, callous. Somebody's been murdered.
Yeah.
And he's just sort of like, oh, what does that have to do with me? Yeah. He really only sees murder, the only sort of emotional stake in a murder is a puzzle for him to solve and a chance for him to get some credit. Petty, he's jealous of the credit that these people are going to get. Now, there are moments where better qualities shine through in Sherlock Holmes, I think, too. He's not always... But I guess my question, we've just listed, I don't quite see manipulative, but
I think
he is at other times.
I think that Holmes is always... He enjoys the game very much.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that. I think of manipulative
here...
is using hidden levers to get people to do what you want.
Yeah,
which he does at other times. I just don't see it in this passage.
I think he's putting. I don't know if he's doing it intentionally or not, but I think he is manipulating Watson to some degree to get him to come along, to get him to be engaged, because there's this whole there's a little of the bait the hook and pull it away. That he is doing to Watson, and kind of gets Watson to be like, what? He's asking you to come, and
I see. He definitely is that way sometimes. I see what you mean, where he kind of understates his interest in something, dramatically sort of under. So perhaps this is secondary to my point. But clever, bipolar, brisk, conceited, petty, vain, jealous, callous. These are not heroic qualities, and yet, do any of these qualities make you want to spend any less time with Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
No, of course not. Because he is just, and because we're in Watson's shoes, that's one of the things that I find really remarkable about this is that Doyle really situates us very, very well in Watson's shoes. And so at the particular moment, Watson is very ambivalent about Holmes at this moment of the book. He's his new roommate. He has been sort of put off a few times by Holmes. He's sort of like, what the devil in the world? I can't wait. I couldn't wait for the man to be brought low by his he hopes the delivery man.
There's a moment where Watson's reading this essay that Holmes has written and refers to it as poppycock.
Yeah.
And says, I would wager that this man, if I brought him onto the subway, would not be able to guess anybody's profession. And then Holmes simply says, you'd lose your money. Although Holmes, I will say that I don't see any sinister quality in Holmes's relationship with Watson.
No.
I think he's pure. He enjoys sort of puzzling Watson, but he's not trying to harm Watson in any way. He's enjoying this new friend and kind of enjoying sort of showing off for his new friend. That's
absolutely.
What I see.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are not admirable qualities, but he is such a force of nature and so ridiculously competent and, very clearly a genius and because we are in this position of trying to figure out our eccentric new roommate, who is, can be kind of annoying, but my Lord, he's very interesting. And there's another point when Watson says my curiosity about my new lodging mate was whatever. It was just prodigious, something like that.
Yeah, well, and actually this was a question I was going to ask you later, but I think in locating us in Watson's first person, and making Watson perplexed about Holmes, he's really amping up what he wants the reader to feel right now.
Yes.
Holmes is objectively interesting, but Watson's curiosity and perplexity and an occasional consternation about Holmes makes all of those things land with like extra aplomb, I think. And I find, to me, Watson's gradual realization of who his roommate is what makes this book great.
Yes.
that is the joy. And I also think there's a Craft Corner aphorism we might reach for that I don't fully have articulated, but maybe you can help me. It's sort of like, if you're going to make a protagonist with a superhuman trait, then also do ellipsis. And it's something like
got it. Now I understand.
Or foibles.
I was like, just trail off.
No, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that
I get it.
I think Holmes's weaknesses. I think this would be a much less boring book if Holmes was a more admirable person.
Yeah, I mean, let's see, a much less boring book or a much more
boring.
Okay,
book. I think this would be. I think that Holmes. And he becomes way more fascinating, particularly the bipolarity. We're calling it that. That's a guess. We don't know. Holmes never says, I have bipolar disorder, manic depression, but he uses kind of 19th century words that seem to suggest a similar thing. And in the next novel, The Sign of Four, he can only relax when he takes cocaine.
Yeah.
I don't think that's alluded to in this novel, but that comes up a little bit later too. So I don't know if he's exactly a drug addict, but he is a heavy user. And he clearly, there's a lot wrong with his brain that he finds uncomfortable. He suffers from severe depression, severe boredom. Benedict Cumberbatch plays him as sort of like having autism, or at one point somebody refers to him as a psychopath in the BBC Sherlock series, and Benedict's Holmes corrects him and says, no, sociopath and high function at that.
Yeah. It's the old Anna Karenina thing, like all happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And and it's the Superman problem. Superman exists because of a very important moment in American history, like American geopolitical history, like when that's what we wanted. We wanted the invulnerable, like no flaws kind of thing. And it's interesting for a bit. But Holmes, you're right. Like, you need to balance the brilliance with all of the other stuff, because otherwise, like, it's just not as fun.
I think there's another element to it as well that I also think is operative, particularly in the first Tom Ripley novel, in The Talented Mr. Ripley, which is he's also something of an underdog.
Yeah.
That even though he knows that he's smarter than Grigson and Lestrade, and Grigson and Lestrade know it, Grigson and Lestrade probably make a lot more money than he does, and they get, they're the establishment. And, I mean, how do you feel when we're in the house where the murder is happening and Holmes just keeps kind of like shoveling shade on Grigson and Lestrade?
It's wonderful.
It's
great.
Do you feel sorry? Do you feel sorry for them?
It's so much fun.
No, especially you just like drag Sherlock, just get to them. Yeah. But there's he's objectively being an asshole.
Yeah.
But Conan Doyle is doing something here to make us okay with that and to make us enjoy that. And I that's what I'm kind of grappling with right now.
Well, he's never, I think you said it earlier, like he is never overtly cruel to Watson.
Right.
And in the same way that, he says things directly to Lestrade and Grigson that he doesn't say directly to Watson. So you get the sense pretty quickly, even if Holmes won't cop to it, that he has some affinity for Watson that rises above the feelings that he has for Gregson Lestrade. And maybe it's because of lack of competition. Yep. And Watson compliments him very well. Like, it's a really good buddy cop. Like, it's a really good buddy movie. Yeah. And but even without that, like you do get the sense that Holmes enjoys Watson. Like he's got a little bit of a crush on him. He enjoys showing off for him, and Watson very quickly figures out like, oh, he's like a beauty queen. I just have to compliment him to get him more on my side, and it's really cute. Yeah. Like it is really sweet. But the only thing I brought today is an exercise that might go on a little bit. I hope not. I'm going to try to keep it moving. But if you look at the rundown, so what I want to do here, and we're just going to do the first 7 chapters because then we go into, well, we're just going to do the 7 chapters for this. My next thing has a little bit of a bit. But what I want to hear from you for each of these, what is accomplished in the character, in like just either in characterization or driving the plot forward. Like so we have chapter 1, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. What would you say is kind of the primary authorial thing that gets accomplished?
We meet our 2 major characters and bring them together.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah. Like we get the gang together. Awesome.
It's same thing as chapter 1 of Snow Crash.
Yeah, exactly.
YT and Hero meet in the swimming pool.
Kaboom! Right? Yeah, we gotta get them together. I mean, like, and the reason I'm doing this is because, like, I think the first 7 chapters are like a triumph of structure. Yeah. Like, if you want to know how to write stuff like this, which means a lot of things. If you want to write for TV, if you want to write film, if you want to write popular fiction, that's not a pejorative. You could do a lot worse than this structure. Okay, the science of deduction. What's the big thing that is achieved in the science of deduction?
We start to learn how and why Sherlock Holmes is extraordinary, and we create a context in which he can be summoned on this particular call to adventure.
Awesome. Yep, exactly. The Lauriston Gardens mystery. What is accomplished here?
The call to adventure. The inciting incident. We're on the case. The game is afoot. The plot has thickened. The action has risen.
Hold on to the inciting... I'm
trying to keep these very short and sweet,
this is great. Hold on to that inciting incident thought. I have a question for later about it.
Sure.
But I think that given what we're talking about, bang on correct. Yeah. What John Rance had to tell.
All right. So this is maybe a little bit harder, but I think now that we've had the call to action, we're going to have a series of adventures in pursuit of the quest. And this is adventure 1, in pursuit of the quest.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I would say is, like, in every one of these little quests, Holmes, like, sort of wins by a little, you know, like, and so sort of continuing what you said, the science of deduction, we are continuing to get clues about Holmes's, superior powers.
Right. Yeah. We're getting characterization the whole time too, and we're seeing how he works. I would say, like, all of these quests, you could either say 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or you could say 1 step forward, 2 steps back, depending, it's kind of, there's a certain amount of, like, not everything goes Holmes' way. And in particular, what John Rance has to tell, John Rance had the murderer in his custody and did nothing about it. And Holmes is mildly frustrated about that and kind of takes it out on poor John Rance, although he gets a half a sovereign for his troubles. So,
he gets a half a sovereign.
Very similar to all the working men in Dracula, he's not going to be very thirsty that evening.
Exactly. I know, yeah. The entire laboring class of England needs to start drinking some
John
water.
Rance literally could have, like, then been, he's straight out, I mean, like, he could have then taken a carriage across the way and had Jonathan Harker hire him to be a lookout on the door or something, or move Dracula's coffin, to its next resting spot.
The insult is hilarious. It's something like, that head on your shoulders is good for nothing, basically.
I'm afraid you will never advance in the police service. Yeah.
Chapter 5, our advertisement brings a visitor.
Okay, I mean, so this is Sherlock Holmes has a weakness, overconfidence. He is quite certain that he's going to trap the murderer with a pretty clever trick. But we learn, and I think the other thing we learn is that the antagonist is stronger than we might suspect.
Yes. Yes. The stakes are getting higher.
Stakes escalate.
Not just, but for whom do the stakes get higher?
Well, for the murderer and for Holmes.
Yeah.
Because Holmes is embarrassed. And now he was pretty confident he was going to solve this case pretty quickly. And now the murderer has proved his match. And so, yes, the stakes are escalated.
Yeah. Tobias Gregson shows what he can do.
I'm trying to remember first of all, we got some important plot, which is we learn that the original murdered party, Trevor's companion, the secretary, whose name I keep mispronouncing. It's like
Stangerford.
It's not Stuyvesant, although it reminds me of Stuyvesant.
Stangerson or something like that.
Yeah. We learn that the murderer has struck again, which also escalates the stakes because this person was murdered with the same raka written in blood. I think, structurally, we also are reminded that Holmes has competition. We also basically... Poor Gregson gets to take his best shot and whiff.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's going on for Holmes? I mean, Holmes is actually quite nervous that Gregson is going to solve the case and then relaxes when he realizes it's not going to happen too.
Yeah, it's our red herring. This is the thing that pulls our attention.
Red herring number one.
Red herring number one. Yes, exactly. That chapter ends with Lestrade showing up and saying that even though you have the murderer in custody, hey, Stangerson is also dead. And so torpedoing the red herring. And then chapter 7, Light in the Darkness. What's the structural purpose of this?
Well, this is Lestrade's red herring. And then it is I guess you would say, first half climax.
Oh, that is well anticipated of step 2 of this exercise.
Yeah.
Climax number one. Yeah. So I'm going to click on the link.
And one more thing.
Yeah.
It sets up another mystery.
Right.
Even though we've caught the murderer, we still have no idea who he is and why he did it, which is what we're going to learn about in part 2.
Okay, so here is what I am proposing. So what I've set up here is a very traditional plot narrative structure, right?
Yeah.
We have a flat line, we have an area for rising action and conflict, we have a point for climax, we got falling action, we got resolution. But I've also put the 5 chapters of the Utah flashback in here. Because the weird thing about this book is that we do the entire plot structure,
and then it kind of resets.
We do something else.
Yeah.
And so here's your assignment. I will allow some copying and pasting. I'm not going to pin you to you have to pick one climax because I don't think that would be particularly fair. Yeah. But where would you put? And again, because I have this both structured in terms of chapter lineup and then just kind of an abstracted shape, you can kind of put these wherever you want and we'll figure out the shape later. But where do you think the exposition goes? If we're considering all of the information that makes this narrative work, where is our exposition?
Well, I'm gonna go to my edition and look at the table of contents because I don't quite remember. On the Great Alkali Plain, the Flower of Utah, John Ferrier talks with the Prophet, A Flight for Life, The Avenging Angels, the Great Alkali Plain. It's a little tough because I feel like all 3 of those first chapters are doing a certain amount of exposition here.
Well, let's just stick it over here then. Let's just
certainly
roughly
we
don't need to go chapter by chapter. We sort of did that. And now my hypothesis is that the structure of this novel is anything but traditional.
Okay.
That's my hypothesis.
I can definitely give you conflict. Conflict is John Ferrier talks with a prophet. That's the third. Okay. So that would be 5, 6, 7. I think that would be chapter 7, right?
Chapters 1 through 7 were still in England. We don't get into Utah until chapters 8 through 12.
The chapter numbers reset though. They
do not
in my edition. In my edition, okay. This is book 2. But basically, you could call. Okay, so if the first one is 8, I think the conflict it would be 10 in this framing.
Okay, awesome, great. Rising action. Where do you want to put
11. That? That's the flight through the night.
Okay, and you're considering the whole book, right? You're not just focusing on the. You're not just focusing.
Oh well,
on
I mean,
the Utah
this is the thing is that like I think we're gonna get 2 climaxes. Which some people would enjoy. You might not be used to that, but
it's not often that we find the cold open while taping. My question here then is like, is this 2 traditional narratives, one housed inside the other?
Well, to finish this if I can copy and paste.
Yeah. Totally.
I think we're going to get a climax. We're going to get one climax here.
Yeah.
Then we're going to get a falling action. And then we're going to get another climax.
Falling action.
Then we're going to get resolution.
Wouldn't you put that climax kind of like here?
There's 3. There's 3, man. The first climax... But if do you need me to put them? Do you want me to rank them in terms of like climaxitude?
No, not at all.
I think it goes like that because I think the first one is a climax, but it's a bit anticlimactic because we don't know what Jefferson Hope is and the stakes of capturing. So it's the climaxes. That climax is the climax of Sherlock Holmes' quest to prove he's the best detective. And he wins. Then we have the climax of the conflict between the Ferriers and the Mormon Church, and they lose. And then we have the climax. Then we have the falling action. Jefferson Hope goes back to town, stalks them for a little bit. Then they go to Europe. Then they're cast out. And then he goes and finds them again. Then we get the climax of the murdering, or as Jefferson Hope would say, the justice. And then, you could argue there's a little bit more climaxy stuff that happens, but then we get exposition again. Because
I know.
How the hell did Sherlock Holmes figure all this out? Yeah. Because we get some of that, but when Jefferson Hope is first summoned to the house, we have no idea why he's there.
Right.
So then Holmes has to tell us, now that we know who Jefferson Hope is and what's at stake, Holmes has to tell us how he figured out who Jefferson Hope was and deduced that he was a cab driver and used the Baker Street irregulars to track him down. I have to say at this point, you need it because otherwise the book doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. But it's also kind of like, all right. And yeah, by the way, I put all of my markers, assuming you meant that we were already doing it for the second half, because we already did exposition, rising action in the first half. Rising action is sorry, I get this out of the way. We got 2 rising actions. We got the murder here. We've got 2 chapters of exposition. One is to get the band together, and the other is to explain a little bit more. We got rising action. We've got our first climax, and I think we need a term for kind of like fun and games or sort of like essays.
I think I would call that the rising action and sort of reverse that the conflict is here. That's the like, and I mean even and that
really is really the conflict is between Holmes and the other detectives,
right? Exactly.
And then it finally. Although I think one of the things that's interesting about the our advertisement receives a caller is that the conflict kind of switches, and I think at that moment Holmes is like, oh. Yeah, Grigson and Lestrade are morons. They're going to be a piece of cake. But this guy, he's actually a worthy opponent.
Right.
I don't think that Holmes ever has any negative feelings to Jefferson Hope.
No.
He just wants to prove that he can catch him. And I think what's also interesting about that is that I don't think that Conan Doyle does either. I don't think that Jefferson Hope is a villain, is meant to really be a villain. You know,
I don't think, totally.
I think there's a sense in which, like, well, it's sort of Freudian. Order needs to be restored. Mm-hmm. Civilization has to be restored. So, of course, somebody who has taken it upon himself to do murder, even for understandable reasons, has to be caught and locked up. But then there's also this sort of like, well, but Providence will take care of that. And
it does.
And then we get the aortic aneurysm. Yep. And Providence is also the one who chooses that. We didn't explain this in our recap, but when Jefferson Hope murders these two guys, he does it. He gives them iocane powder. Mm-hmm. He gives them two pills that are identical. One of them is poisoned, one's not, and he trusts that God will choose to ensure that the evil one will take the poison pill, and that will give him, he's trusting in God's will in that moment. He's taking it out of his own hands, which is also kind of interesting.
Yeah, he's not trusting in rugged individualism, which is what Wesley trusts in The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you would
rugged
think,
individualism combined with very good planning.
Right, exactly. Yeah, knowing the game ahead of time.
Knowing the game years ahead of time.
I think the point you just made, that the conflict weirdly is among the detectives in the beginning parts of this book, and you would think that in a detective novel it would usually be between the detective and his quarry,
right?
And it never really is. It's always Holmes against an intellect, and that's really what it seems to be. But I just think this is just such a remarkable, weird structure. I think that if I were to get my fingerprints all over it, the Utah section is too long, given the scope of the book. It's about a third, and there's some dutiful characterization, but there's a little too much, and we sort of get away from the great game that we're in. I would sort of think that we could kind of make some of that a little bit shorter.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I mean, I think part of it is that Holmes is just such a great character.
Oh yeah.
That it's just kind of terrible to. It's just hard to spend. The second half of the book ends up being a letdown, not because it's really bad, but just because we're like, get back to Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, get back to that
guy. I want Sherlock Holmes. Like this Mormon shit is kind of boring, Jefferson.
You have one more assignment before we depart these shores. There is a single initial incident button, and you can only put it in one place.
Oh, damn.
I've been very lenient up until now, but I am intrigued, and I don't think there's a right answer, but I'm intrigued as to where you might put it.
Well, there are two places I think you could put it, but I'm going to choose chapter 3.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. Maybe we can label it. Maybe we can label these at some point, because I do think we are recording the screen capture. We might be able to use it. I think initial incident is here.
Oh, interesting.
I think that the initial incident is the Mormons saving Ferrier and Lucy.
Yeah, it's funny because if I were going to pick my second one, I would have said Lucy and Ferrier choosing to go.
Yeah, I can see that
because
too.
I think part of it is I think of the initial incident as point of no return.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and so I could see that.
But and I would say if you were to tell the story in chronological order, then your choice would absolutely be correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm basing my choice on the experiences of our protagonists.
Yeah.
And when our protagonist is brought into the conflict, to me is, when they arrive at the house and the murder has been done. And that's the moment where Sherlock Holmes, who I really do think is the protagonist, is hooked. He's gonna figure this out. And so that's the rationale for my choice. But this is also a book that has 3 protagonists.
Yeah. And I think you just made such a great point that, like, can you imagine how bad this book would be if it were in chronological order?
Yeah, it'd be terrible.
It would be
terribly
so boring. You'd be like, why are we reading this?
Yeah. It is. And I mean, it's an extraordinary act of structuring. I agree with you. And I think the only hope of coming up with something this good is to recognize that part of what it is it's the same structure twice in microcosm with a unifying connector. And that if you're thinking about 3-act structure, if you think about a movie, often if you were to take a movie and you were divided into acts, say 3 acts is very common, sometimes 5 acts, often each act has the same structure as the overarching story.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fairly well-established narrative principle, and I think Doyle's doing it brilliantly here. Although to the point, I had the same thing, which I was just kind of like, second half, let's get back to Sherlock Holmes more quickly. Just there's a lot of Jefferson Hope. There's a lot of, and it's just, to me, that kind of story is less interesting because Jefferson Hope, Ferrier, Lucy, neither of them are really interesting, fascinating characters in the same way that Sherlock Holmes is.
They're archetypes. They're just archetypes.
Yeah.
And if you're ever tempted, if you ever need stage direction in your work, got to keep it moving. Like that shit has got to be quick and snappy. And I mean, even for a novel or a novella that is pretty slim, you really can't. I would argue actually you need to be even quicker with it.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think there's 2 ways you could make this book better, and one would be you could make the second half in Utah shorter. Other thing is you could give Sherlock Holmes and Jefferson Hope more to get up to in England.
Yeah.
Like, you could make catching Hope a little bit more difficult. And in fact, in The Sign of Four, which I read recently, like a year ago, which is the next novel, it's similar in that Holmes figures out who the murderer is pretty quickly, but then they have this, like, at the time, high-speed steam launch chase in the Thames. That's like the equivalent of like the Fast and the Furious, like, final climax scene, happening at about like 20 knots, which is a blazing speed in 1890. And I think in other Sherlock Holmes stories, I mean, we learn very casually in this book that he is a great boxer and swordsman, and very smartly that comes into play in future stories. And Sherlock Holmes actually sometimes functions as an action hero. And so does Watson get to, which is great because Watson is the consummate underdog, right? He's kind of meek, mild-mannered doctor who's been injured in the war. But there are, a few latter books where, Watson gets to be the hero, which is, of course, you love that because he's our stand-in.
Right, he's us, and when you get
and like we get to help Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Is your service revolver handy?
Exactly.
Yes, I have it. It's in need of a clean and some fresh cartridges.
The reader might forgive a certain lapse in modesty if I point out at this moment that while the man was escaping, it was in fact I, Dr. Watson, who stuck my foot out and tripped him as he headed down the stairs, thus rendering him into a state in which Inspector Lestrade found it easy to clasp the handcuffs upon him. I don't know if that literally happened, but that's the sort of thing.
That definitely happened. Yeah, for sure. Like that. I
believe that the old service revolver comes out of, I imagine, sort of like an oilcloth in his underwear drawer several times. For the final confrontation.
Well, thank you for indulging that.
It was great. I think and we have the video clipped, so
we do.
So this could be a great little animated video.
I do like that Canva, like shortly after that began, was like, "Do you need help organizing your sticky notes?" Did you get that pop up?
No, but that's hilarious. I think we can go to trivia. I think we got.
Nice.
I think you go first this time.
I am very excited about my trivia.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, in the early part of the 20th century, Doyle played on an amateur cricket team called, I shit you not, the Author's 11. Which I was like, oh my God, what?
I really hope that Bram Stoker was involved, who was also a great sportsman.
What famous British writer was not ever on the Author's 11 extended 15-man roster? Because I did have to do a little digging here, and apparently you can carry 15 players in anything but an international test match, and an international test match, your extended roster is 16. So you were trying to pick the famous British writer, and that's all of the British Isles,
right?
Who was never on Author's 11.
Okay.
A. J.M. Barrie, author of Peter Pan. P.G. Wodehouse. George Bernard Shaw, author of Arms and the Man. A.A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh fame, or Beowulf Schaefer. And that one's a giveaway. That one's obviously Beowulf Schaefer was not on the Author's 11. But
so remind me who number 4 was again?
A.A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh.
Okay.
So we got Peter Pan, Jeeves, Arms and the Man, Winnie the Pooh.
This is such a Chris Bag question.
I don't think I would get it. This is just like, this is absurd. This is, yeah.
I'm going to guess George Bernard Shaw.
You are correct. Great job.
The reason is that I think he's a little too young.
And probably a little too Irish.
Yep. Maybe a little too gay.
Maybe you're right. That could be it. Yeah, I mean, cricket as the other posh sport of England other than rugby, you know, I imagine there's some complicated feelings for the Irish about that. You know, it's going to be complicated on complicated, but way to go.
I didn't know that George Bernard Shaw was Irish. I did not know that. Yeah.
Apparently, J.M. Barrie was an excellent fielder. P.G. Wodehouse was described as decent. And A.A. Milne was enthusiastic, but just a terrible cricket player.
I mean, but come on, like, that's the best cricket team ever. I mean,
and I did a little they're.
I mean, not like in terms of skill and talent, but like this is the team you'd want to be on, right?
Oh my God,
like
seriously,
so
nobody has made a movie of it.
About well, there's probably no conflict or plot or anything. Although maybe you could make the movie about George Bernard Shaw applying to join the team and being forbidden to because of homophobia or anti-Irish sentiment at that time.
But I was so tickled to stumble upon this piece of history.
Was Doyle Scottish?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know. Because his mentor, who actually Joseph Bell, was Scottish. So I think he spent time in Scotland, but
he was Scottish. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
He was born in Edinburgh, 1859.
Very good. Yeah. All right. So my trivia is in fact about Arthur Conan Doyle's mentor and inspiration for Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Joseph Bell.
Okay.
So Arthur Conan Doyle was a doctor, and at one point he was a student, and I think maybe like sort of like a intern or resident under Dr. Joseph Bell, Scottish doctor. And Dr. Joseph Bell was probably the greatest inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. And he was known to have powers of deduction that he would use not to solve crimes generally, but to, although I do believe he sometimes consulted in a sort of forensic sense for detectives, but mostly for, diagnosis and medical things. What anecdote about Dr. Bell was a direct inspiration for Sherlock Holmes as depicted in this book? A, he correctly guessed that somebody he met had recently been to Texas in the United States based on clues in the man's appearance. B, he correctly guessed that an attendee at a lecture was a dock worker by looking at that man's hands. C, he refined a pre-existing chemical test called the benzidine test, which could identify bloodstains. And even though he did not invent that test, he refined it and improved its reliability.
We go with C.
No, it is B. He correctly guessed that an attendee at a lecture was a dock worker by looking at his hands and seeing kind of a wear pattern of calluses and salt stains.
Oh my gosh, that's
enough
awesome.
Too. But there was a test called the benzidine test, which could identify blood stains. And it would have been accurate that if Holmes had invented such a test that could work several months later, that would have been a breakthrough in 1887 because the benzidine test wasn't super accurate and only really worked with rather fresh stains.
Yeah, and I think we get sort of an allusion to that in the story that says that it's something about that in there.
Yeah, he says that if this test had existed, this murder would have been solved in New Orleans, and this other murder in France would have been solved. I mean, among other things, Sherlock Holmes reads a lot of true crime.
Yeah, he sure does. Yeah. And I mean, there is actually a real good clue. Like Holmes's hands are actually sort of deducted at one point too. Because he's got little pieces of plaster all over it because he's always like stabbing himself with lancets and all sorts of chemical stains and whatnot.
Right. At one point, the mutual friend says, Sherlock Holmes is the sort of man who might slip a little bit of the latest alkaline in your drink just to see what it will do. But to be fair, he would also take it himself.
Yeah.
It's not malicious, which is very Isaac Newton, right? Like, remember the anecdote about like distending the eye with a knitting needle in order to see what it would do? Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, terrible.
All right, Chris Bagg, will you read this book again?
I don't know if I'll read this book again, but like I also won't not read this book again. It's delightful. It's quick. It goes by real fast. But what I think its chief glory is that it points to the future brilliance of the other Holmes stories.
Let me ask you that. Do you expect to revisit the Holmes canon?
Totally.
You've got that big chunk of Doyle books.
I know. I'm gonna throw this in my bag and take it with me down to LA, and it's gonna be awesome. But awesome. I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, I think I probably will read this one again. I read this in middle school, and I remembered the 2-act structure, and there were certain moments I remembered. But man, reading it again was just. I think what I missed in middle school was just all the subtextual shade that Holmes is throwing at everybody around him, and that is so entertaining.
Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I am fascinated, so I probably will read it again. I also feel like this would be, if I ever have occasion to read a book to a teenager, this would be a great, great book to read to a teenager. Or,
oh my God,
I think it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Next up, we are reading Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.
This will be one of the oldest books I've ever read. I've never read it.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are 2 American corpses. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. Thank you so much, guys. Find us on Patreon, where there are a number of tiers at which you could show your support.
And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Or you can roll as a patron at the You Really, Really Like Us tier, which includes some one-on-one editorial time with one of us or the other, or both, which reminds me, by the way, we owe that to some people, and we need to schedule it. And another reminder, everybody, on May 19th this year, coming up very, very soon, we're going to do a live watch party of Anthony Minghella 1999 masterpiece, The Talented Mr. Ripley. So stay tuned to our website and our social media channels like Instagram and Blue Sky for some details about the live watch party of The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Yes, we would not leave the shores of Ripley without finally getting to the Minghella version, which we are both really excited about.
I'm going to ask you for the 6 Ripley films in order of best to worst. That's
right now.
No, when we do that live event.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, oh, okay.
You got 4 weeks. You got 4 weeks to think about it. Maybe you're going to overthink. I should ask you about it at the event. No, but while it's fresh in our mind, because actually, if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you have heard all the other Ripley film episodes since they will have come out first.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Go read some Sherlock Holmes, or the next time that you feel like watching some Sherlock Holmes, have a read of the text too.
This book holds up. It is delightful. I was like watching something on, I don't know, like Netflix or something recently, or Apple TV, and I was like, this is boring. I'm going to read A Study in Scarlet, and that was better. And not to say that the thing on Apple TV was bad. I was just like, sometimes the classics are really good.